All right, Miss Mary, let's talk about rain gardens. Real popular now. We're getting a lot of questions over the Extension Office about rain gardens.
Okay.
So let's start with this. What is a rain garden?
Well, a rain garden is nature's puddles. And if you think about the water cycle, you know, it rains, the rain comes down, it washes across the land as it's moving across the soil and across the earth. Sometimes it stops in a puddle. Sometimes it gets detained in that water. It absorbs down into the soil, replenishes the aquifer. The water that doesn't stay in the puddle eventually makes its way to rivers and streams and evaporates back up, condensates, comes back down, and it's the cycle. But in our human environment, we've sort of added some elements to nature. We've added streets, we've added roads, we've added patios, driveways, roofs, and we've created sort of a water superhighway. And we think of water in some ways as a waste product. We put gutters, we put downspouts, we put concrete swales in our yards. We do all sorts of things to get the water away from us. And so a rain garden is really going back and thinking about how water functions in the water cycle and putting it back into our yards' environments. And of course, as gardeners, we like to do things as natural as we can. And so the rain garden is nature's puddle.
Okay, nature's puddle.
Yes.
Don't you like that, Walt?
I like that.
All right, so here's the next question, though.
Okay.
Is it a water garden? Because most folks think so.
Right. There's confusion between a water garden and a rain garden. A water garden is a water feature. It's intended to hold water. There's a difference between detention, like when you were a kid and you got detained after school, but you got to go home after an hour or so.
Okay.
Whereas retention is you got held back. You were held there. You had to stay. A water garden is retention. You're actually holding the water. It's a water feature. It stays there. It functions like a small pond or lake or whatever you've created, waterfall, and it's intended to be there, and you have to think of that ecosystem.
Okay.
A rain garden is just detention. It is that puddle. It's that point in the water cycle where the water is slowed down and held in the environment.
Boy, good analysis. I like that one. So what's the rain garden's place in the water cycle?
Well, it's intended, like I said, as a puddle to catch that water. So what you're going to do in your yard is you're going to look at where that water is moving through your yard, where you may have a washout, and where you want to create a way to create that puddle, to create that capture. And what it does is there's two things. In that superhighway, you're picking up all the pollutants off of your yard's fertilizers, off of the driveways, off of the streets, the oil that comes up through the asphalt. And if we send it through a hard surface superhighway of concrete and whatever, that material it stays with us. It goes straight into our surface waters, straight into our creeks and streams and rivers and lakes. But if you do biofiltering or you put these puddles in their way, the water seeps through the earth, and anywhere from 30 to 40% has been demonstrated that those pollutants are absorbed and cleaned and eaten by the soils as they perk down into the aquifer.
That's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah.
Okay. So where do you place a rain garden? I'm sure everybody wants to know that.
Well, you look for those areas where the water is naturally flowing. I tell folks, get out there with your little video camera or your cell phone camera when it's really doing one of our Mid-South gully washers and watch where it's going. Some of you may already have spots in your yard where you can see where the soil's been eroded or washed, where you're constantly fighting that, and that may be a natural place to look.
Okay. Now, the next question behind that is going to be this. How big? Because I'm one of those, I tell people, to start off small, but how big?
Well, in other regions of the country, it's a very exact science because they're actually really trying to slow the water. Where their water tables are high and where they're having real strong issues with surface water, they have very exact measurements where you look at your roof, you look at your driveway, you look at the area you're trying to control the runoff, and you measure according to that. And there are many manuals out there, and at the end of the little talk, you can go to that Tennessee Smart Yards, the UT program that's connected with our extension office. And it will give you diagrams and tell you how to measure and how to figure out, you know, how much area are you draining, and therefore how much of a garden should you build.
Okay, good deal. We'll make sure we get that website out there for our viewers. How about the perk test? You know, we always talk about soil tests, so let's talk about the perk test.
Well, you know, in the Mid-South, we're very concerned about our clays.
Yes.
So we want to know if what we're doing, if we are detaining water, if we're creating an area where we're going to hold water for a little bit, are we going to create a problem for ourselves? So you're going to do a perk test where you'll dig 1 foot, you'll prime the soil by filling that 1 foot hole up. Then once it drains, you will do your test. You'll put the water back in. 24 to 36 hours, the water should drain out. If it doesn't, you've got an issue. You may have standing water, and then you get into the whole mosquito issue and things like that. So you want to do that perk test to make sure. There are ways to amend the soil, do double digging. All of that's covered in those manuals that I've directed you to.
Good deal. All right, how about plant material? You know that's what the gardeners want to hear about.
That's right. Well,
what are we going to put in this rain garden?
Well, the good thing is that because it's a nature's puddle and you're doing something within the water cycle, you're also going to go with native plants. I mean, you are mimicking what's natural, so that means native plants will be very amenable to being planted in these gardens. Okay. You're going to go through the year's water cycle. You're going to have wet feet periods. You're going to have dry feet periods. The garden itself, the way they're designed, you have sections of the garden that are drier and wetter. And I guess I didn't really talk about how that garden is designed, but when the water comes in, usually you have an inlet, and the opening area is shallower than the exit area.
Right. Okay.
The exit area is deep, so it's like a bowl that's kind of tipped up to take the water coming in and then hold it as it goes out the back end. Sometimes you have very defined inlets, and sometimes you have very defined outlets. And then your plant material, the edges are usually drier and wetter in the center. Okay. Plants that have been used, and there's also references to several Tennessee wild native plant guides in that Tennessee Smart Yards website. So they can find that there. But I've used Rudbeckia, I've used Echinacea, I have Joe Pye in my garden, muley grass, several gardens that I looked at in Chattanooga, and they have them in a lot of municipal installations, and their extension office has a big rain garden in front of it. They used the Tennessee iris. Okay.
Quickly, while we have just a little time left. So if people wanted to hear about rain gardens, could they contact the Master Gardeners for that?
They sure can. We have a speakers bureau, and we have a PowerPoint presentation that's about an hour. Okay. So any garden club or any interested group could ask and get a speaker.
And they'll be doing just fine if they got you.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate that.